The hospital was dead quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and fills the corridors with tension. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, buzzing softly, throwing sharp white shadows across the polished floors. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe to fuel more amazing stories. The night shift moves slowly, almost mechanically, nurses and orderlies in crisp uniforms, voices hushed, footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Alexander Hart entered with a confidence that seemed to ripple across the sterile air. Even here, in the world of white coats, antiseptic, and machines beeping in rhythm with human frailty, he was a figure of power, sharply dressed, commanding attention without a word. He walked with certain weight, the kind that announces you own more than just money. You own influence, presence, the expectation that people will notice you. But that night, he noticed something he hadn't anticipated. She was a black nurse, young, composed, and moving to the ward with a precision that was almost hypnotic. Her hands were gentle yet deliberate, tending to a patient with care that suggested not only skill, but deep empathy. Every motion, every glance, every soft word she spoke to her patient held weight. There was something magnetic about the way she existed in the room, entirely focused, entirely her own. Alexander felt it immediately, a pull in his chest, strange and unfamiliar, that made him pause mid-step. He didn't understand it at first. Curiosity? Admiration? Something sharper, something deeper. He had never felt this before. He approached, walking toward her with a confidence that bordered on entitlement. His footsteps echoed louder as he closed the distance, and yet, somehow, the quiet of the ward seemed to hold its breath. "Can I help?" he asked, offering a gesture toward the patient's bed. His voice was low, smooth, measured, meant to charm. She glanced up at him, calm, unwavering, as if she had anticipated this intrusion. Her eyes met his, cool, steady, unflinching, and in them he saw a wall that his wealth, his power, could not breach. "Mr. Hart," she said, voice soft but firm, almost like a hand pushing back against him. "You don't belong here." There was no fear in her tone, no awe, no hesitation, just clarity, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Alexander smiled, thinking that charm to bridge any gap, that influence could bend any resistance. "Maybe I belong where I want to be," he murmured, a trace of amusement in his voice, though beneath it, a flicker of something else, something unsettled, began to grow. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't respond beyond the polite firmness of her gaze. Her refusal wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. That simple act, a refusal to yield to him, a refusal to be impressed, a refusal to be swayed by what he represented, hit him harder than he expected. A polite no. That was all it was. And yet, the weight of it settled in his chest. It was foreign to him. He was used to people nodding, bending, accommodating. He was used to power being enough. And here it wasn't. Here it meant nothing. He stepped closer, unconsciously drawn to her presence, to the grace she held even under the fluorescent harshness of the night shift. He watched her hands as she adjusted them for, as she whispered reassurances to her patient. He felt his pulse quicken, an ache spreading across his chest that he couldn't name. Fascination, infatuation, something heavier, something that felt like vulnerability. It was unsettling, dangerous, even. He was a billionaire. He was used to controlling situations, bending outcomes, buying influence. But here, with her, nothing he had ever known worked. The night stretched long around them. Alexander lingered, finding excuses to be near, pretending to check on machines, adjusting his cufflinks, pretending to be absorbed in charts he didn't read. She noticed, of course, but didn't acknowledge him beyond what her duties demanded. She spoke with patience, administered care, moved with efficiency, and yet every movement was a reminder. She was untouchable, not in arrogance, not in pride, but in her dignity, her competence, her refusal to compromise who she was. Alexander left the ward that night, feeling more unsettled than he had in years. He walked out into the cold, damp city streets, the hum of traffic and distant sirens filling the space where his confidence usually resided. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she carried herself, about the way she looked at him, not with fear, not with desire, but with recognition of him as a man, nothing more, nothing less. The rejection, though subtle, had pierced him in a way no rejection ever had before. It was more than a no. It was a mirror held up to him, reflecting a world in which money could not buy connection, could not command affection, could not erase integrity. As he drove home that night, the city lights blurring past, he replayed the moments in his mind. Her hands, gentle on the patient, her eyes, steady and unyielding, her voice calm, a quiet authority that demanded nothing but deserved respect. Something inside him shifted. Curiosity had deepened into obsession. Not the shallow kind, but a yearning to understand, to bridge the chasm that separated him from her world. He realized he had never encountered anyone like her. Not in all his wealth, not in all his influence. Never someone who could stand in his presence and lead him stripped of certainty. The night did not offer answers. The hospital, quiet and flickering, had become a crucible, revealing to him vulnerabilities he had never acknowledged. He was captivated, unsettled, and powerless in ways he had never been, and it terrified him. Wealth had never failed him. Influence had never failed him. Desire had never failed him. And yet, here it did. She had refused him. She had seen him fully, and still, she had remained untouchable. That night, Alexander understood something fundamental. The world of money, of status, of influence was not absolute. There were spaces it could not penetrate. There were hearts it could not sway. And he had encountered one such heart. He had felt the sting of rejection, yes, but more than that, he had felt a spark, a heartbeat that refused to bend. It was a challenge, a lesson, a story beginning before it had even revealed its shape. As the city slept around him, he sat in his car, staring at the rain-streaked windshield, wondering if he could ever earn the kind of respect and admiration that she embodied. And then he realized it wasn't something to be earned. It was something to witness, to honor, and perhaps to learn from. That night, the billionaire left the hospital unsettled, obsessed, changed, not by love, not by desire, but by the quiet power of a black nurse who refused to bend to anyone's will. The story was just beginning. This version is cinematic, descriptive, and emotionally rich, written in continuous narration for Chapter 1, hitting all black voices' cues. Tension, power and balance, subtle humiliation, fascination, and moral seed for transformation. Alexander Hart had never known a resistance so absolute. The hospital lights glowed cold against his tailored suit as he walked the corridors again, each step deliberate, measured, calculated. He had tried the usual methods, the charm, the gestures, the small tokens meant to impress, but here, none of it worked. He left a bouquet of white roses on the nurse's station one morning, a delicate gesture meant to coax a smile. She glanced down at the flowers, then back at her charts, expression serene, unbothered. No words, no acknowledgement beyond the polite efficiency of her work. That refusal, quiet as it was, ignited something in him, a fire, sharp and confusing, because for the first time, power and money had no sway. The next day he appeared again, offering coffee during rounds, his voice light, easy. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up," he said, smiling, handing her the steaming cup. Her hands, steady from years of practice, barely flicked the lid. "I don't drink coffee at this hour," she replied, eyes not meeting his. Not once did she falter. Not once did she give him even a hint of approval. He tried to charm, tried to impress, tried to bend the situation with laughter and subtle flattery. But she remained unwavering. Every polite no, every neutral glance was a tiny wound, invisible but sharp, cutting into his pride. Alexander's frustration grew with each passing day. How could someone so ordinary, in his world so carefully curated for power and control, hold such dominion over his emotions? He had never been denied so absolutely. He had never been made to wait, to yearn, to question. His wealth, his connections, his influence, they were meaningless here. He even tried subtle pressure, hinting at favors, positions, opportunities for her friends that only someone in his world could grant. Yet she did not flinch. She accepted none of it, treated none of it as leverage. She was untouchable, not because she was distant, but because she refused to compromise herself, refused to bend for the sake of comfort or convenience. One night, Alexander lingered near the ICU doors, pretending to be interested in something mundane, charting his name in his phone, but really watching. He noticed her kneeling beside a young patient, holding a trembling hand, whispering words that were calm, gentle, and unshakable. The child's eyes, wide with fear, gradually softened under her presence. She spoke as if she carried the weight of the world lightly on her shoulders, commanding, tender, alive. He stopped in his tracks. His wealth, his experiences, his life of endless indulgence could never replicate what he was witnessing. Her compassion, her humanity, her presence. It was something money could not buy, something influence could not coerce. Alexander felt his desire twist into something unfamiliar. Admiration, respect, a flicker of humility. And yet, it was tinged with frustration. His rejection burned like fire through him, sharp, bitter. It wasn't just a denial of his attention. It was a mirror showing him a side of himself he had never faced. Entitlement, obsession, the arrogance of assuming that anything he wanted could be had with enough effort or persuasion. Mariah, in her quiet dignity, had shattered that illusion. Days bled into nights. Every encounter became a test he had never expected to face. She moved through the hospital corridors with effortless poise, never flustered by his presence, never distracted by his attempts to infiltrate her world. Nurses and patients barely noticed him as he trailed behind, obsessed with an invisible line she had drawn and refused to cross. His frustration became almost physical, coiling in his chest like a living thing. He wanted to push, to insist, to demand, but every instinct that had ever guided him in the world of wealth and power failed. Every manipulation, every subtle pressure, collapsed against her unwavering principles. The tension was compounded by moments like the one he overheard in the ICU. She spoke to a patient, a young man with fevered eyes and trembling hands. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm right here," she said softly, placing a steady hand on his arm. The room, tense and chaotic a moment before, seemed to still. Alexander felt a pang in his chest. He realized with a jolt that his fascination with her wasn't driven by desire for conquest, but by awe. He admired her strength, her refusal to bend, her ability to remain human in a world that often demanded compromise. That night, he understood something fundamental. She was untouchable not because she was out of reach, but because she refused to compromise her dignity for anyone, not even a billionaire. He tried again the next morning, slipping a note into her locker. "I admire you," it read. Simple, honest, nothing transactional. He watched from a distance as she discovered it, saw her pause, finger tracing the edge of the paper. She did not blush. She did not look impressed. She tucked it away, resuming her rounds as if nothing had happened. And in that silence, he understood. True power wasn't in wealth. True power wasn't in persuasion. True power was something she carried effortlessly, a quiet authority that demanded recognition on her own terms. Alexander's obsession deepened, but now it was tangled with respect. He no longer saw her merely as an object of fascination. He saw her as a force he could not influence, a life he could not control, a standard of humanity he could only aspire to. The hospital became a crucible for his own ego, revealing cracks he had never acknowledged. Every polite rejection, every unwavering glance, every moment of quiet competence hammered home the lesson he had so long avoided. Control is an illusion, influence is limited, and dignity is inviolable. And yet, despite growing respect, a fire still burned. Rejection stung. Desire remained. Frustration simmered. He found himself lingering longer, watching more intently, noticing the way she moved through life with grace under pressure, the way her voice could soothe without asking for anything in return. His power, his money, his carefully curated world. It was useless here. And that realization, sharp and cold, unsettled him more than he ever thought possible. He knew this tension could not last forever. Something was building, something on the edge of revelation, a shift in the balance that would challenge both him and her. He could feel it in the way the nights dragged, in the way his heart reacted to her presence, in the way he observed the small human acts that no money could buy. The stakes were no longer about flirtation or charm or even desire. The stakes were about respect, about understanding, about confronting the limits of power. And he was not used to being powerless. As he walked away from the war that night, the rain-slicked streets reflecting the city lights, Alexander knew one thing. This woman, this nurse, had changed the rules of the game. He could no longer rely on what had always worked. He could no longer assume the world would bend to him. And in that uncertainty, he felt the first stirrings of transformation. Not hers, not yet, but his own. She had become a mirror, a challenge, and perhaps the beginning of something he had never encountered before. Humility, admiration, and the realization that life's most valuable lessons could not be bought. Mariah remained unaware of the storm she had stirred, moving through the hospital with quiet focus, her dignity intact, her principles unshaken. Alexander's obsession was no longer about conquest. It was about understanding, about respect, about reckoning with the truth he had long ignored. And the tension, raw and electric, promised that the next chapter, whatever it held, would not be as predictable, as controlled, or as easy as he had ever imagined. The hospital was alive with chaos that night, a storm of alarms, hurried footsteps, and hushed but panicked voices. The fluorescent lights, harsh and flickering, barely illuminated the tension in the ICU. Alexander Hart, the billionaire who usually moved the world as though everything bent to his will, found himself frozen at the edge of the ward. He had come to witness, perhaps to insert himself, perhaps out of lingering obsession. But now, nothing in his experience could have prepared him for what unfolded. A critical patient's condition was deteriorating at a frightening pace. Monitors beeped erratically, the rhythmic pulse of life threatening to vanish. Doctors shouted numbers, demanded interventions, recalculated dosages, but nothing seemed to stabilize the boy. Panic hung in the air like a dense fog. Alexander's eyes fell on Mariah. She was calm, controlled, moving with an ease that seemed impossible amid the chaos. He noticed something he hadn't before: meticulous notes, scribbled in her handwriting, organized yet precise, highlighting anomalies in the treatment plan. Details everyone else had missed. His chest tightened. Every instinct screamed that this was his chance to act, to step forward, to claim relevance. And yet, he hesitated. He wasn't trained. He had no authority here. But the anomaly, her observations, was undeniable. Swallowing his pride, he stepped closer. "Wait," he said, voice low but carrying over the clamor. He pointed to her notes, to the sequence of irregularities in the treatment protocol, to the subtle miscalculations no one else had noticed. At first, the doctors glanced at him, then laughed. A billionaire lecturing medical professionals? Absurd. "Excuse me, sir," one muttered. "Maybe leave the saving lives of people trained for it." Mariah didn't flinch. She didn't scold him. She simply looked at her notes, then at the patient, then back at the team, her calm authority radiating. Her voice, quiet but commanding, cut through the panic. "Adjust the fluids according to this chart. Recheck vitals in 5 minutes. Administer the correct dosage here. Now." She didn't ask. She didn't beg. She instructed. And the team, slowly, reluctantly, followed. Alexander held his breath. He watched as the patient's vitals began to stabilize, slowly, cautiously, the beeping of the machines finding rhythm again. Relief crept into the room, washing over the exhausted doctors like a tidal wave. He felt a tightening in his chest, not of pride, not of victory, but of awe. This was a woman who had rejected him, who had refused his gestures, his wealth, his charm, standing untouched and unbowed, commanding respect through knowledge, precision, and humanity alone. She had power he could not buy, could not coerce, could not command. For the first time, he felt humility, not the shallow humility of politeness or image, but the deep, gut-wrenching awareness that his world, his wealth, his status, all the things he had clung to as proof of superiority, were meaningless in the face of true skill and compassion. She didn't need him. She didn't bend to him. She didn't care about the status he carried or the influence he wielded. She existed on her own terms, and in doing so, she saved a life that mattered in ways he hadn't considered before. He stepped back, letting the team complete her instructions, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. He saw every detail. The calmness in her movements, the precision in her hands, the steady cadence of her voice, the way the terrified patient's eyes relaxed under her touch. He realized finally that the rejection he had felt before, the polite but firm no that had stung so sharply, had been a gift in disguise. It forced him to confront the limits of his power, the illusions he had long harbored about influence and control. Alexander's mind raced as the crisis subsided. Gratitude replaced obsession. Reverence replaced desire. The woman who had seemed untouchable in her defiance had proven untouchable in her ability to save lives, to command respect without bending, to hold dignity when everything around her descended into chaos. He could never claim that kind of strength. He could only witness it, and in witnessing it, he was transformed. Mariah didn't acknowledge him. She moved through the ward with quiet purpose, checking on the patient, documenting notes, communicating with the staff. Alexander followed at a distance, silent, absorbing every gesture. He wanted to speak, to offer thanks, to say something meaningful, but words failed him. How do you thank someone for showing you the limits of your own world? How do you acknowledge a lesson in humility so profound it reshapes your sense of self? Hours passed. The crisis faded. The hospital settled back into its routine, the alarms quiet, the frantic energy replaced by a weary calm. Alexander left the ICU, stepping out into the cold night, the streetlights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement. He felt lighter, strangely unburdened, even though the sting of prior rejection still lingered in his chest. It no longer burned with resentment. Instead, it pulsed with recognition. Recognition of true strength, of unbought authority, of human dignity that could never be purchased. He thought back to the first night he had seen her, the first polite no that had shaken him so thoroughly. Now he understood. That rejection had been a mirror, a test, a challenge he had been too proud to accept at first. She had forced him to confront himself, to recognize that wealth alone could never command respect, that desire could not substitute for skill, that influence was meaningless when measured against integrity. She had saved more than a patient. She had saved his understanding of what truly mattered. Alexander walked home slowly, replaying every detail. The chaos of the ICU, the fear in the young patient's eyes, the calm certainty in Mariah's movements. He realized that admiration and gratitude were far more powerful than obsession or desire. He felt a stirring of something new, the urge to be better, to understand, to appreciate rather than demand. She had shown him a world beyond wealth, a world where compassion, knowledge, and moral courage commanded more authority than all the riches he possessed. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, replaying the events in endless loops. He felt the weight of transformation settle over him. The woman who had once refused him, who had seemed so untouchable, had revealed truths he had long ignored. He understood now that life was not a series of transactions, that love and respect could not be bought, that power had limits, and dignity was non-negotiable. He had been humbled, he had been educated, and he had been awakened. Mariah moved through the world with quiet power, unaware of the transformation she had sparked in a billionaire. She never sought recognition for the lives she saved, the composure she maintained, or the lessons she unwittingly taught. Alexander realized that this was her strength. She acted not for approval, not for validation, not for influence. She acted because it was right. And that was a power he could never command, only witness, and perhaps one day emulate. The night ended not with triumph or conquest, but with clarity. Alexander had been confronted with a truth he could not ignore. Wealth, status, charm, all were illusions in the face of true skill, compassion, and moral courage. The reversal was complete. The one he had once desired, once pursued, had shown him a force far greater than his own, human integrity. He understood finally that life's greatest lessons often came from those we cannot buy, cannot control, cannot bend to our will. They come from witnessing strength, from respecting it, and allowing it to reshape our own hearts. And so, he walked into the dawn, not a man defeated, but a man awakened. The woman who had rejected him had saved a life, and in doing so, had saved him from the arrogance he had carried for far too long. He would never see the world the same way again. The rain fell in steady sheets, a rhythmic patter against the asphalt and the hood of Alexander Hart's sleek car. He stepped out of the hospital, coat damp, hair slightly mussed, but there was a quiet in him he had never felt before. The streets glimmered with reflections of neon lights, but he barely noticed. His mind was heavy, yet calm. The chaos of the ICU, the alarms, the panic, it all seemed distant now, replaced by a stillness that settled deep in his chest. He had walked out of that ward a different man, not because of wealth, not because of influence, not because he had gained anything tangible. No, it was because he had witnessed something far greater than himself. Rejection had been the spark, but not humiliation. It was awakening. For weeks, he had tried everything to capture her attention. Flowers, coffee, invitations, subtle hints of favors. All of it had failed. And yet, in that failure, he had been forced to see a truth he had long ignored. Respect cannot be bought. Skill cannot be purchased. Dignity cannot be coerced. Mariah had embodied all three without effort, without concern for who he was, without thought for his wealth or status. And in that embodiment, she had taught him a lesson that no luxury, no privilege, no influence could ever deliver. As Alexander walked through the rain-slicked streets, the city around him buzzing with indifferent life, he replayed the ICU moments in his mind, the way she had moved with precision, calm authority radiating from every gesture. The patient, once terrified and unstable, now steady, his life balanced delicately in the space between competence and chaos. Alexander had watched helpless, while she orchestrated calm with nothing but knowledge, humanity, and integrity. He realized that for the first time, his heart had been humbled, not bruised, not defeated, but reshaped. He thought of the polite refusal, the quiet no that stung him so sharply when he first approached her. At the time, he had considered it an obstacle, an affront to his pride. Now he understood. That rejection had not been a denial of him. It had been a mirror. It had reflected the limitations of his world, the illusions of control he had long cherished, and the arrogance he had carried like a shield. Through her refusal, she had taught him humility. She had shown him that love is not possession, that power is not control, and that true strength is not measured by wealth but by integrity, courage, and compassion. Mariah continued her work, unaware of the transformation she had sparked. She moved to the hospital as she always had, focused, patient, resolute. She did not boast. She did not seek recognition. She did not bend for praise or reward. And that was precisely what had unsettled him, what had challenged him, what had finally reshaped him. Alexander realized that he had been chasing something he could never own, and yet he had gained far more than he had ever expected. She had reminded him of what truly mattered. His mind wandered back to the young patient whose life had teetered on the edge just hours before. He remembered the fear in the child's eyes, the trembling hands, the desperate clinging to a parent who could only watch. And he remembered Mariah, calm and unshakable, guiding them through the storm. It struck him then. Her strength was quiet, almost invisible, yet unstoppable. Wealth could not replicate it. Power could not command it. Influence could not compel it. It existed in her alone, and she wielded it without arrogance, without expectation, simply because she had integrity and compassion at her core. Alexander's chest tightened. Gratitude, deep and unspoken, filled him. For the first time, he did not feel the need to impress, to assert, to dominate. He simply observed, simply respected, and simply learned. Life, he realized, was not measured by bank accounts, luxury cars, or penthouses overlooking city skylines. Life was measured by courage, by character, by the way one treated others when there was nothing to gain. Mariah had lived that truth every day, and in doing so, she had transformed him. He thought of his past relationships, the people who had been drawn to him for status, for gifts, for attention. He thought of the moments where he had assumed control, where he had tried to bend others to his will. And he saw, clearly now, how hollow those victories had been. None of it compared to witnessing someone stand firm, refuse compromise, and save a life with nothing but knowledge and care. That was victory. That was power. That was grace. The rain continued to fall, soaking through his coat, soaking through the city, as if washing away the arrogance, the pride, the illusions that had long weighed him down. He raised his head, feeling the cold droplets on his face, and allowed himself to breathe fully, deeply, for the first time in years. The lesson was simple, yet profound. The world is not a place to dominate, but a place to learn to witness, to respect. Those who carry true strength rarely demand attention. They simply act with integrity, and their impact echoes far beyond what anyone can see. Alexander knew that his journey had shifted. He was no longer the man who tried to bend the world to his will. He was no longer obsessed with possession, with desire, with the illusion of control. He had been humbled, educated, awakened, and it was because of her. She had refused him. She had saved a life. She had refused to compromise her principles. And in doing so, she had offered him a gift far greater than anything money could buy: clarity. He imagined speaking to her, expressing thanks, acknowledging what she had taught him. But he knew words would fall short. How could he convey the depth of transformation that had come from being denied, from being humbled, from being forced to confront the limits of his own power? He realized he didn't need to. The lesson had taken root in him, irrevocably, quietly, like the rain seeping into the cracks of a city street. Alexander looked up at the dark sky, streaked with clouds and rain, and allowed himself a small, genuine smile. He had been changed, not by victory, not by wealth, not by influence, but by witnessing courage, skill, and integrity in someone who refused to yield. The woman who had once seemed untouchable had shown the world he had never understood. A world where respect cannot be demanded, where strength is measured by action, not status, where dignity is not for sale. He walked away from the hospital, the rain sliding down his coat, streets glimmering like fractured mirrors. Each step felt lighter, each breath deeper, each heartbeat steadier. He had learned that life's greatest lessons often come from those we cannot control, cannot buy, and cannot command. And sometimes being denied is not rejection. It is the most profound gift. It reveals what is truly important, strips away illusions, and forces us to see ourselves in the world clearly. Extinguished, a lesson that would guide him long after the rain had stopped.